What's up, witches? Hello. Welcome, everyone to the May session of the Coven Community Book Club. What is going on? It's a pleasure to see all of you. It's so wonderful to have you all here. We are here to discuss the May book, which is
What's up, witches?
Whoa.
Hello.
1 second.
Welcome, everyone to the May.
I was wondering where that sound was coming from. That makes sense. Okay, it's our live feed. Okay, so we are discussing the book Portal of Light by Janine De Oya. This is our May selection. Very excited about this one. There was a lot of chatter about it in the Coven community discussion space, so I'm really excited to get into it. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to leave up on the screen the graphic here so that if folks come in a little bit late, they can catch up with us. But we're going to get right into it and start off with the intros, just asking everyone to share their name, location, and book progress so we can fly through the intros real quick and get into it. I'll start us off. My name is Allie, aka BronxWitch. I am located in the Bronx, New York, and I finished the book. Woo-hoo. All right, let's see who is next.
Hey, you all. It's Ahmad. I'm here in Boston, Massachusetts, and I guess for me, I looked it up. It would be the Massachusetts tribe. That might be a broader thing. I might have to get a little bit more specific, but I want to shout out to them. And I did finish the book, and I really enjoyed it from African American perspective.
Welcome, Ahmad.
Also, forgive me for multitasking tonight.
That's all right.
Allie, am I up? Betty from Toronto, Canada. I finished the book and I really, really enjoyed it from a Caucasian perspective. So really enjoyed the book.
Thank you, Betty. Welcome.
Hey, everybody. I'm Shanice. I'm in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm on chapter 6 of the book, so page 218. So I'm almost finished. I'll finish up this weekend if I can. But I like it so far. It's very dense. Like, I wish I would have had this when I first started, because the path that I went on when I first started, nowhere near. So I wish I honestly would have had this when I first decided I wanted to practice.
Thank you for sharing that. Welcome, welcome. It's great to see you.
Hello, this is Shonda. I'm not sure if you can see my video or not. I'm driving. But I finished the book. I am in North Carolina, and native land is Tuscarora. So I was really excited when this book popped up, because this is my mentor. She is from the same place. She's like an hour from me. So I was very excited to see this book. I've already read it and rereading it again, and I like it.
Awesome. Welcome. That's so cool that you have that connection to Janine. I've gotten the chance to talk to her a little bit about the book, so that is super awesome. So welcome. Let's see. I think that's everyone. I think Betty just signed in again, but I think that's not another person, so we should be all good. So I just want to point out to you guys that you can all vote in the poll, and I encourage you to do so here on Zoom. There is a poll asking you to rate this book. I think this is something we're going to do going forward, so that I can kind of keep track of what we thought of the book, because we usually talk about it, people share their thoughts of it. and then we move forward. But every once in a while, I have someone ask, you know, what books have you guys read already? Or what did you all think about this book or that book? So I'm going to try to make sure there's a poll every session so that we can vote and share our thoughts. And of course, I had to be cutesy about it. So it's like out of how many cauldrons? From 1 to 5 cauldrons, 1 being like, I didn't like it at all, 5 cauldrons being like, it's amazing, awesome, highly recommend, wish I had it back in the day, like Shanice was saying. So go ahead and vote in the poll, and we will end that poll at the end of the session and see what we thought collectively of Portal of Light. So we can go ahead and get into the chat. I have some discussion points up on the screen if you are able to see the shared screen right now. But, you know, I honestly definitely want to hear from you guys, because in the Coven community discussion space on the book, I feel like I shared quite a bit of my thoughts. So if you are in the Coven community space, then you probably have already had a good idea of what I thought about the book. I had a lot to say, and there were a few others who took advantage of the discussion space and also shared their thoughts on the book. So I'm most interested to hear from folks who didn't share anything in the discussion space between now and the last time that we met, because I'm really curious to hear from you guys. So we've got some points on the screen, things that folks can, you know, decide to talk about, or completely other things that you want to talk about. No need to like raise your hand or wait to be unmuted or anything like that. Feel free to mute yourself. And we'll get right into it, because this book is a book on Wicca specifically. And we have not read that many books that are specifically like how to Wicca books. So I'm curious as to whether or not folks have read other books on Wicca and how this one compared and contrasted. So we can start there, and I'll open up the floor.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I'm looking at my bookcase and I'm trying to see, what is Wicca based on this bookcase? I don't think very much is. I can personally say, though, that this was, again, something that I wish I had when I first started, because when I first came on or started or wanted to practice, it was all about, oh, Wicca is just, it was a lot of trash talk, basically. Black folks don't do Wicca. Wicca is so dogmatic, this, that, and the third. So it was just really good hearing from her perspective. And honestly, I didn't want to admit it, but there was a certain page where she has what's traditional and what's like Wiccan. I was quite surprised at how much that I selected or agreed with that was in that Wiccan sphere. And I was like, oh, I learned something new today. I learned a new thing. So yeah, that was my biggest takeaway, is that there's so much more to the religion and practice of Wicca than what I was willing to understand, because the trend or the cute point at the time was no practitioner is a Wiccan. That's lame. That's like circa like 2007 or like circa 2010. Like, it's old. So yeah, it was really nice to hear from a Black woman's perspective.
I totally agree. For me, I was looking for something. Everything that I researched was through, I guess you could say, quote unquote, it was always a different perspective. Most of it were white people, and I was wanting to find something with an African American or Black perspective. So when I found this group with you guys and Allie, it was great. And then when I found this particular book, I just loved how everything was broken down. It was easy for me to understand, and it was through a perspective that I understood, and it made sense to me. And I did enjoy the book.
As far as the breaking down parts, I liked how she covers so much before she even hits crafting and spells. Like I said, that's where I am in the book. So before you even get there, you have covered angel numbers, you cover like basic spiritual principles, like you covered some of the Kabbalion with the laws of correspondence, the laws of mentalism. Like she made sure she had her T's crossed and her I's dotted. And again, this book is dense. Like I legit had to set aside at least an hour to sit and like read a chapter. And I don't necessarily read fast, but I consider myself to be able to process information relatively quickly. But knowing that I actually have to like sit down and read, like, oh, okay. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Nisa, you touched on two things that I took notes on that were like major takeaways from me in terms of how Janine approaches the book. And one of them was the fact that it wasn't until chapter 3 that she starts talking about what Wicca is. And it wasn't until chapter 6 that she starts talking about spell casting. I definitely think those are two things that in a typical Wiccan book happen a lot earlier and happen with a lot less foundational information provided beforehand. So I was really glad that she waited so long to start getting into some of that like quote unquote fun stuff. And that she gave us all this like metaphysical background, all this pagan background, all of this foundational stuff before going into that. And then I really liked how she tied the different components of Wiccan practice into the Hermetic principles, because I think that we hear about that a lot, you know, when learning about Wicca. Okay, it comes from Gerald Gardner, and he was influenced by the Golden Dawn, and they were influenced by Hermetic principles and da-da-da. But to actually have somebody point out, okay, this part of Wiccan practice comes from the law of correspondence, and this part of Wiccan correspondence comes from the, you know, the law of gender, and the law of attraction isn't a Hermetic principle, but it's also become very influential in Wiccan practice. Like I thought the principles were important, and the ethics, which came towards the end of the book, that people will get to. She gets into the ethics of Wicca. And there's another book by, I think it's a Cunningham book called The Truth About Witchcraft Today. And the reason why I almost called it The Truth About Wicca Today is because I think that's what it should be called. Because unfortunately it was written during that like 80s, 90s period where Wiccans were calling Wicca witchcraft and like confusing the fuck out of everybody. And the book really isn't about witchcraft, it's about Wicca. So the book should be called The Truth About Wicca Today. But either way, the reason why I like the book is because the first half of it, or the second half of it, one half of the book is about like this type of stuff. How do Wiccans practice? What do you put on your altar? What are the Wiccan tools? What are the holidays, etc.? But then half of the book is about what do Wiccans believe, which I think you see less frequently in books, and it's sometimes a little bit harder to like put your thumb on and concise, like make concise into one, you know, deliverable thing. So I thought it was really good that she does that. She talks about the principles and she talks about the ethics. So you walk away from the book really understanding not just like, you know, how to be a Wiccan, step 1, step 2, but like, what does it mean? Where do these principles come from? Why are these practices what Wiccans do? And like, what is it that Wiccans typically believe around, you know, these practices in the rest of the world? So yeah, I agree. It's really dense because it goes way beyond just the how-tos to getting into the why, which you guys know is my favorite question. So.
I really enjoyed it. And Allie, you know a bit about my background. And I came into the intro saying Caucasian because when people look at me, that's what they see. But I was raised by Caribbean people. So I really relate. Like there was a lot of this that we've read in other books, but then there was always a nugget, just that extra little nugget that I was like, oh, I haven't seen that yet. I haven't learned that yet. And like so many things I can relate to into the book because of how I was raised and whom I was raised around. I I found it really, really interesting. I really enjoyed it, especially having read stuff and then always getting that little nugget that was something extra that she added that I didn't see in other books. I can't pinpoint exactly what it was, but I always found when she was talking about something, there was always another layer that I was able to get from what she explained. And so, good book.
Yeah, I don't know if like the layers are the same thing, but for me I don't know what it is that like makes this better to me really was the African/African American component, because everywhere through the book she would and this is another one of my notes, she would tie in how it related to something with African spirituality or African culture or African American spirituality or culture. And she did it in a way that was so seamless. It wasn't like, okay, here's like the Black part of the chapter and like it was very much like, so here's a principle and we see this principle in Europe, or we see this principle in Asia, and we see this principle in Africa, and this is how this is all connected. And so like, yes, this is definitely Wicca from an African American perspective, but I could totally see how anybody would find this to just be like a legitimately super in-depth Wiccan book. And I think it's because she adds that extra element, and that's something you don't typically see in Wiccan books because they're often written by white authors. And so they don't typically stop to think, how does this principle tie into the African American experience, African history, because we lose sight of the fact that the Hermetic principles are African. We're talking about ancient Egyptian, or what some people call Kemetic principles. And so much has been done to convince us that Egypt is somehow magically not on the continent upon which we see it sits. But the truth of the matter is that these principles that Wicca is based on are African principles. So I have actually often been really confused about people who are so anti this idea of Black people practicing Wicca, because it's very African in its roots. It's coming from Kemetic principles, which are Egyptian, yes, but that is African. So I think her adding that layer is what makes it so much more layer, so much more in depth than your average Wiccan book that just sort of stops at the European element, or starts at the European element. Maybe that's the problem. They don't go far back enough to be like, okay, before the Greeks, what were these things based on? So
yeah, I totally agree. That's definitely that like elephant in the room that always gets skipped over in these conversations. They'd be like, oh yeah, derives from Greek philosophy, Hermetic philosophy. And I'm like, the word derives means that's where it stems from. So you're missing something. So I'm like, and I know, but you just deliberately, left that part out. But yeah, I agree. This was a great book. That's why I said from an African American perspective, because I thought she really kept that focus throughout the book, which I really appreciated. I got to feel a taste of, if I was reading the the first Wicca book that people usually read, The Solitary Practitioner and such. I definitely got that feel from this book, because I do have a lot of Virgo placements, if you couldn't already tell by how much I go off. I am very critical of things, but I'm usually critical of things that I love. So I, there were some things that I saw that I'm like, I don't know so much. Or there were some things that I were like, this is a little bit of a stretch, but I see where she's going. And I feel like it's more so for UPG, like a personal gnosis, as opposed to going out into public with the information and being like, yeah, this is how African Americans relate to Wicca. I felt like it was more so like, okay, this is how you can personally, as an African American, relate to it, without trying to stretch it too much. One thing I did see was, hold on, let me make sure. One thing I did see was there was this chart she has, and it's on page 88. And so the chart is I think you were talking about it, Shanice. I think someone mentioned the chart, but it's called The Dichotomy Between Old School Wicca and Eclectic Witchcraft. And that's on page 88. And I was just like, I was a little, I did not agree with this chart, I have to say. It was very, first of all, I had to go back and check to see when this book was published, because I was like, what's going on with this language? You know, there's definitely a lot of light and dark going on in there, which I was very surprised, you know, from a sister. And, you know, which is cool, because I feel like we can use that language. It's not off limits as long as you know why you're using it. And like, you know, you can kind of explain that a little bit. So I was a little surprised that it says copyright 2022, unless it came out before that and then was reprinted. But yeah, there were a couple of things. So of course, follow the Wiccan read. We know Wiccans, you know, other witches probably not, or maybe, depends on, you know, but there were some, like, let's see. Follows altar, recognize with the god. Feels the craft is mainly about spells. A Wiccan, never, or almost never. Someone else, almost always. I thought that was really interesting that someone would think that people who don't identify as Wiccan but are still witches would think that their craft is about spells. I know I sure don't. Let me see. Feels the craft is about theory first. Basically, it was just that dichotomy between, it almost seemed like Wiccans were more spiritual about the craft, whereas others weren't. And I thought that was a little weird.
And see, now that you pointed out, I see it now. Point 9, hexing, cursing, and crossing is okay. Wicca, almost never. Eclectic witch, depends on the witch.
Yeah, and I was like, I don't know if I like these dichotomies here. This is seeming a little...
Well, you know, Wicked in the room here. I do have to interject there just on point 9, because for that part, I would have to say that I do agree on the point. The Wiccan read ends with "and ye harm none, do as ye will," and many Wiccans specifically interpret that as meaning that we do not do baneful magic. And whereas eclectic witches who do not subscribe to the read tend to be more open to it. So I would say that one is I think actually accurate, but to Ahmad's point, definitely things like number 7, I would say, I definitely think she's showing some Wiccan bias there, because it's really hard to say. I would say whether or not Wiccans or anybody else, like what level of importance, like what does mainly mean? I think that's these are kind of vague. Some of these categories are kind of vague, so I think it's not necessarily super accurate to break that down that way. But 9 I felt okay with. I just wanted.
Okay. I guess the reason why I say that is because sometimes with that principle of hexing, cursing, and crossing, sometimes it kind of comes off as like that toxic positivity, light worker-y type of thing. So I guess that's why I made that correlation, but I definitely understand where you're coming from. And obviously, because you are a Wiccan, I would definitely weigh that more against my own personal bias and or opinion. Because like I said, I kind of came into it biased anyway. Because like I said, when I came in, everybody was, oh no, we don't do Wicca. That's for the whites. So.
Yeah, no, there's definitely that misconception that, well, I call it a misconception, but yes, people often associate the Wiccan decision to not cast baneful magic as an indication that Wiccans believe that there's like no evil in the world, there's no negativity in the world, and that all problems can be solved with just like lots of Care Bear hugs. I have a different theory on that. I don't want to take up too much time, but my theory on that just comes down to, if you truly believe that you are a witch, and if for you that means that as witches you create the world that you want to see, then I could never understand how you could expect to create a world that is full of love and light while sending anything other than that out into it. So but that's literally my personal philosophy on why I think I'm a big bad boss witch. And I also still avoid baneful magic when I can. So, but yeah, people usually think, well, if you're not cursing people, then you don't really have any tools at your disposal to protect yourself, to defend yourself. to right the scales of justice if something is done wrong to you. But I disagree. And one day I'll go all into the other things that are available to you, I think, or different ways you can approach it. But yeah, people be hating on us.
Right, right. And I just, I definitely, respect definitely your perspective as a Wiccan. I still have to say I do disagree with that. I think that's very broad in terms of that hexing hexing and cursing. I think that's a little almost like looking down on people, or thinking that they know that what people are about, or that they think they know what people think that witchcraft is about, which I don't think this is the case. I think everybody, no matter what your path is, it doesn't have to, that's almost like a Christian saying that other people will do things that they won't do because they're Christian. So I don't think that's true, because there's so many people of different faiths who would not touch anything like a hex, so I find that problematic anyways. But there's also something else that I guess I didn't quite agree with, in that, even the Wiccan read, it really depends on who you talk to. If you talk to someone from traditional British Wicca, which they actually don't even like to call it Wicca, because it's a long story and dichotomy, but the British traditional witchcraft, Alexandrian or Gardnerian, it's like they don't, a lot of them don't associate the read like that. It's almost like a, harm none but take no bullshit type of read. It's also like it's almost wrong to let somebody harm you as part of that read. Some people interpret it like that, so for you to have someone putting attacks on you and you not to put defenses up is also, you going against the read. So I feel like there's different perspectives of it. I've heard some really hardcore ones from initiated Wiccans, or from not, solitary Wiccans, and vice versa. So I definitely think that's a dichotomy. Even about the whole Wicca witchcraft thing, some of them don't call themselves Wiccans, and they say, as they say, Gerald Gardner didn't actually say the word Wicca in the book. He called it witchcraft. So yeah, all interesting perspectives.
I can definitely understand where everybody's coming from and their own perspective of the book, because when I was reading, I was kind of like reading the book, but then I had other books that I was going back and forth through to see, okay, this doesn't make sense to me, or this makes sense. How do I understand? Vice versa, things like that. There was a lot of, like you said, with the dichotomy. I'm one of those that research. So I was like, okay, so is this what only African Americans read? Or is this, if I go looking further somewhere else on another type of book, is it going to have the same wording? If I go online, is it going to be the same wording? So I definitely understand. To me, it just broke it down a little bit more for me to understand. But I did, as they say, do your research. So I definitely did the research.
One thing that I had highlighted that I thought was really interesting, and that maybe sort of kind of balances out that dichotomy chart a little bit, like with the chart kind of being a little like pro love and light, pro Wiccans being very love and light. I found it interesting on page 142 when she was talking about dark magic. She said, this type of magic is powerful because the intensity of their animus conjures strong vibrational energy that brews long before the witch can cast their spell. This magic is often more potent than light magic or even gray magic because of the ease most of us have to summon this type of energy. It has its own clone of power. In contrast, light magic tends to take longer to conjure and does not have that feverish cone of power or energy that comes to us easily with feverish emotions. And so like, aside from maybe the outdatedness, a little bit of like the light, dark, gray, categorization, I found it really interesting to hear a Wiccan basically kind of give a shout out to dark magic. And the idea of working with dark energy as being more potent in a lot of different ways, and maybe it being the choice of the witch or whether or not to dabble in it, but still acknowledging where dark magic might have greater strength or might even be like easier for the practitioner like to accomplish and to access. So that was kind of a surprise for me, because usually you would think that somebody who is Wiccan and more in support of like the light aspect of things would only really champion light magic and try to put down, dark magic. But she's kind of like, nah, it's mad strong. When you be pissed, you can get some shit done. Just saying, so I liked that. And I felt like that balanced out maybe her like, pro Wiccan energy a little bit. And I definitely think there's like a lot of dated energy and just the language and things like that. And the book was published in 2022, but it's my understanding that she was initiated as a Corellian high priestess in the early 90s, late 80s, and has been teaching this course called, she has a organization called the African American Wiccan Society, and she teaches this course and has for like many years, probably 10 plus years. So the original course is old, and she's recently turned the course into a book. So people who don't want to take the whole class can basically, still learn the material. So I definitely think there's a lot of like that sort of 80s, 90s language in throughout what she says. So it's important to know that, I think. And then I think folks are also making the point, like if the person is using the language light, dark, but we know that they know like what they're trying to say with it, then, and that's what I get from her. I think sometimes when you're reading a piece that's written by someone who's maybe older or has been a part of a tradition for a long time, you're going to see these instances where things feel a little bit like dated. But I thought the point was really good, and I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I think it brings up a point, like, like the fact that I completely respect, this woman, and the fact that I still, and I hope everyone does, still take that step back to say, hey, you have biases too. So, everyone does. So, and I think that's a healthy thing to always remember. So I loved everything that you're talking about. And, I think it's fun to sometimes be like, but wait a second, and that's just my critical way that some people really hate about me, and it is what it is. But one thing I really also loved, I guess I'm diving in a little deeper, is y'all know me with the astrological magic that I love. So I love that she brought in like techniques in here. She went past, she went through the sun, with the wheel of the year. Then she went through the Espits, which I love to celebrate, and I'm trying to incorporate more. But more specifically, she has this chart on page 206. That's about the correspondences and the planets. Am I doing that right? Yeah, and the planets. And then I love that she brings in like an Orisha or a Loa that could be associated in African culture. And it's funny because these are a lot, not specifically the Orisha, but like kind of that setup and that energy are the same energies that I've associated. Like when we say that Mars is on Tuesday, I've always been like, oh, Ogun. Like that's definitely Ogun. You know what I'm saying? If you want that war, that metal, that kind of, conquering kind of energy, like Ogun. So on. And I think this is an important thing that people forget, that we have this kind of weekly setup to kind of tune ourselves, or at least to be holistic with, with our practice, which is our holistic health, because each day you're kind of focusing on something different based on the planet, whether it's outward or inward. And I just really like the system. It's a system that I follow, kind of like smaller than the moon system and smaller than the wheel of the year system. It's my daily system that I follow. So I love that she incorporated that and the different magics, you can focus on.
Yeah, I thought this was like one of my favorite, just like little charts, because I have read or flipped through, it feels like, every book on Wicca ever. And they always have a days of the week chart, and they always break down the name correspondence and how it relates to Freya and Thor and Mercury and Mars. And I have never seen anybody incorporate the Orisha or the Loa or Asian spirits, just anybody other than the like Greco-Roman spirits. And while I understand that the words that we use for those days in English most directly correspond with them and things like that, the idea of each day of the week or each planet or each week of the year or whatever having its own energy is definitely not unique to the Greco-Roman spiritual / religious practices. So you could probably literally throw a dart on a map and just pick that spot in the world and go and look and see what spirits related to the days of the week in their tradition and put it in your chart. And no one ever bothers to look beyond the obvious. So I thought that was really awesome that she did that. One of my favorite, going back to the criticisms, because we're analyzing, right? So one little criticism, and this isn't a criticism of her, because obviously she did not come up with this idea. But I think when you guys were talking about like some of the things that are feel like a little bit of a reach or a little bit of a stretch, on page 144, she's talking about, I think this is the spell casting section, or before spell casting, journeying into magic. And she's talking about the principles of the Kabbalion, and she says these principles assume that the universe itself is alive. The universe is both a receiver, transmitter. It receives information from us, not just from magical spells and meditation, but from our everyday lives. It is believed that the universe picks up the vibrations and frequencies of our existence and sets the current of those vibrations and frequencies to automatic. So I was like, okay, yes, I understand that. That is why manifestation works. I thought this was a great explanation of like a simplification of what you want to call the law of attraction, cause and effect, whatever these principles that we get from the Kabbalion. This was really nicely condensed. But then at the end, she's like, for now, just think of the law of returns as the old school law your grandparents preached to you about. What goes around comes around. To Wiccan, it is called the threefold law. And then she doesn't say anything about that. And I was like, wait a minute, can we talk about this, Janine? Because the threefold law doesn't make a lot of sense according to that principle, because the threefold law actually says that what you put out comes back to you by 3 times. But you just explained why the universe really just reciprocates the frequency that you put out. So why would the energy come back 3 times over? That has always been a critique that I've had of the threefold law, especially when people have used it as a reason for not to do baneful magic. As Wiccan, because I can list many reasons why I choose to refrain from baneful magic and like what I think it does for the world, what I think it does for me and my practice and blah, blah, blah. But none of them are because I think what I put out is going to come back to me 3 times over. That's not in alignment with the universal law that I like to rely on as like the foundation of my practice. So she just kind of mentions that Wiccans call it the threefold law and doesn't dive into that. And I would have liked her to have been like, can you explain how the threefold law actually lines up with what you just described? But that's not really her fault, because she didn't create the threefold law. I just maybe would have liked to see her be a little bit more critical, perhaps, of like Wiccan practices, and been like, Wiccans call it the threefold law. That don't really make a hell of a lot of sense, but that's what they call it. Like that's what she should have said. And then I would have been like, yes, Jimmy, that's it. But aside from that, I really do think that her explanations of like the middle of the book is where I have like the most tabs and folds and stuff, because when she's getting into the journeying into magic, spell casting, like chapter 5, 6, 7, that's where she drops like all of these gems about why magic works. And that's the part that I think matters the most, because at the end of the day, you can be whatever religion, you can assign yourself to whatever practices you want for community, for whatever, blah, blah, blah. But does it work? Like, but does it work though? You know what I mean? Whatever it is it working for you? And I really like the way she explains spell work, manifestation, the universal laws that form the foundation of that, meditation, visualization, all of these components of like how it is that spells actually work. She spent a lot of time on that and really, I think, explained it in some ways that I just think are really, really good. And that I definitely, even as somebody who already casts spells successfully, I felt like I walked away with an even better understanding of what is happening. And I think in particular, my favorite thing that I think she distinguishes in the whole spell casting world, and people might disagree with her simplification of it, but she basically breaks down kind of the differences between, like, I guess you might call it the spiritual witch versus the non-spiritual witch. On page 143 at the bottom, she says, you may know the how you cast a spell, but you don't know why it works or who actually cut you the check. And I was really like, I vibrated with that because I've always considered myself to be like a spiritual type of witch. It's never been enough for me to just put some things together in a satchel or, you know, in a jar or whatever and just have it work. I need to know why. I've always wanted to understand what is happening when I do those things. Like, is it angels? Is it ancestors? Is it a miracle? Is the plant doing something? What exactly is going on? And so that has led me down a sort of like a spiritual type of witchcraft that not every witch practices. A lot of witches are happy to put some things in a jar and have you go away and not ask, like, who did that for me? Or like, how did that come to be? But I'm definitely the former type of witch. And I've never really like, I thought of it that way, but I didn't know if other witches saw it that way. So I thought it was interesting that she seems to also see that there are some witches who take the more spiritual angle of like wanting to know what is happening behind the scenes. And there are some witches that are a little bit more involved in the practical, you know, like just how do I most effectively accomplish this spell? And both are fine at the end of the day, as long as you get your, you know, your results. But I felt seen. You know, I was like, yes, that's what it is. I want to know who cut the check. Like, why did he leave the job? Like, I'm happy that it happened, but like, also, did I make an agreement with somebody that, like, I don't know, I don't fully understand. Like, I want to know the whole story. So.
No, that's true. That's important. I feel like there's a lot of, you know, moves, even when, you know, people start dabbling, they make a lot of moves and they may not actually know like how deep it goes. But also, there was something I was going to say about what you just said. I'm sorry, and I just blinked on it. I was just going to say, I guess one important thing to note, like about that, about knowing the logistics, is that sometimes that's even a privilege to even be able to like research and discover like the way things work, or the inner workings. You know, some people really just do it operatively based on need. You know. They don't have the time to figure out, oh, how does this work? You know, they just need it to work. And sometimes that's based on them being in a certain situation. So like for me, I definitely started out just being like, okay, this is what I do. This is how stuff works. Let me discover. And then as time went on, you know, I'm like, okay, I want to know more, you know. But there's also people who are like brilliant, right? Like, I mean, brilliant at doing different things that literally have no idea how. If you ask them how they're doing it, they're like, oh, I don't know. But they can do it really well, you know? So many levels to it.
Did we lose Allie?
Her box is still there, but it's possible we can.
No, I'm still here, guys.
Cool, cool.
I got a phone call. The conversation continues.
I was gonna say, Ahmad, to your point as far as being practical versus being spiritual. I kind of had to work backwards. So when things were being explained to me as far as why things work, my brain automatically went, okay, well, does it work for me? So just get the stuff, try it, and see it. Basically, F around and find out. That was my method. F around and found out. And it did. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, there's nothing wrong with being on both sides of that spectrum of just needing to have the higher reason versus needing to get it done here and now. Rent is due, lights is due. We got to get this money shot shaking.
I mean, can I tell you real quick? I'm not even gonna go full into the detail, but like one of my first spells that I ever did, because I thought I was helping somebody, which in a way I did, but it was a justice thing, and someone was in danger, and I took it to the graveyard. What the hell was I doing? What the hell was I doing there? I don't know, but I took it to the graveyard. I found a 3-way tree, put it there. When I tell you, about 15 minutes later, I was puking. Like by the side after I left.
Wow.
I did everything the way I thought was right with respect, left something. But when I tell you, I was literally throwing up, like in my car when I was done. And like I knew, like I could feel that it was like the energy, the whole energy from the thing. And that's when I was like, yo, this shit is real. Like I feel this, So sometimes you start operatively or practically, and then you're just like, whoa, there's more to this.
Mm-hmm.
One of the spiritualists that I like just sort of like loosely friendly with, but they have like a really good point when they talk about spells, and they call it karmic repercussions. I don't know if I would call it that because my concept of karma isn't quite like that. But there is something that happens when you cast a successful spell. I call it splashback. And the way I describe it to like students when I've had spellcasting students is that it's like throwing a pebble into a clear pond in front of you. If you throw something nice and light and gentle, then the splash back that comes back is going to be light. You might have the time to move out of the way. It might not be that bad. But if you're throwing boulders, which is what I consider left-hand magic to be, there's a lot of splashback, and there might be mud and muck that comes with that too. And so when you have a relationship with the spirit realms, for me, the reason why I want to know why and how my spells are working in the unseen world is because I feel like that lets me know if I should maybe take a little shimmy to the left before I throw this. Should I put the poncho on? You know what I'm saying? Should I not even bother because there's snakes in this bitch? Like, I feel like having that connection gives me that further insight where I'm not casting and then now I'm having experiences afterwards that I wasn't prepared for. I don't know who to call on for help with and, all of that kind of thing. So for me, it's like, it's about that. And I think that in terms of history, I give a lot of thought, maybe more thought than is necessary, but I give kind of a lot of thought to like, who were the witches and why did they get this reputation in the first place? And why are so many people against them? And when we look at practices like the ATRs, we look at voodoo, for example, and you look at voodoo in West Africa. If you were to call any of those practitioner witches, they would probably slap the crap out of you because to them, voodoo is to stop witchcraft. It's to undo witchcraft. It's to heal you from witchcraft. Voodoo is to address problems that come up in the spiritual realms, not so much in the physical realms and things like that. So I thought that is just kind of an interesting take on it, an interesting way to look at how everything happens. And it might be that witches were the people who didn't give concern or consideration to whether or not they had like authority or permission or protection on the other side. And they were the practitioners who were willing to do things without that first, not that first step, but without that element, you know, just knowing like, hey, if I do this and I do that, it's going to work. Whereas the more religious witches don't use that terminology because they're more tied to, okay, what spirit did this, or what authority do I have to request this, etc. Just got me thinking about the history of like witches in general.
I definitely had to learn. But everything that I tried, I don't know if it's good not to have this flashback, because to me, I don't know if I can handle it. But like I said, when I met Allie and I was watching your videos, I didn't even know you. And there was something that you said in one of your videos, and I was like, let me try, because I was trying to find my path. But when I first started out, I thought, hey, I need to have a goddess. So that's kind of where I started in the beginning. And I was like, okay, what do I need to do? And some of the videos that I watched that were yours were, you know, I was listening and it was like, use this or try this. And when I tried it, it worked. And I was like, okay, good. That worked. Now what do I need to do? And that's kind of how I found Ms. Jenny in trying to just, I was trying to suck in everything. So I was just trying to say, okay, I'm going to get from here. I'm going to get from here. But then I started to learn that, wait a minute, Shonda, slow down, because you can't pull too many things. You need to get someplace and be still, you know? So when I found Allie, I was like, okay, this is working. The things that she's saying, the things that I'm trying, that I've watched in your videos are working for me. This is where I need to be. This is who I need to learn from. And then when I found the book, The Portal of Light, and then I'm listening, and I'm a hands-on person. So yeah, I know I can go to the web and you can print out stuff. But when I found the book and I saw, okay, this altar, understanding the colors, and I was like, okay, yes, let me try this. Let me see if this is going to work for me. So with me, I do a lot of candle magic because to me, that works for me. I can talk to my ancestors and I feel connected in that space. So I definitely learned that this is something that helps me. This keeps me calm. This keeps me happy. And I'm happier, so my family's.
We may have lost Shonda, but I think she was just saying when she's happier, her family's happier, which I can absolutely relate to. What is going on in your space makes a really big difference. And it's good to have an accepting space as well, to be able to like read things like this, explore things like this, and have people be accepting, be understanding, and let you, you know, tap into this part of yourself for your own peace. That is great to hear. So thank you for sharing that. And let's see, are there, if there are any other thoughts, I want to remind people that we have a poll going on for your vote on how you would rate Portal of Light, 1 cauldron being absolutely would not recommend it, do not like it, and 5 cauldrons being highly recommend it, love it, all of that good stuff, keeping my copy, blah, blah, blah. Alrighty, so make sure to vote in the poll. We'll share the results of the poll afterwards. But now we're going to head off into our breakout rooms. Our breakout rooms are a show and tell period. This is an opportunity for you to share any rituals, spells, journal entries, and things that you may be working on that are inspired by the book, perhaps, or relate to your experience with the book in some way. Remember that everything that happens in the breakout room stays in the breakout room. So everyone appreciates you keeping everything shared private. And we'll get to know each other a little better for a few minutes, and we'll come back together in about 10 to wrap it up and say goodbye. All right. See you guys in the breakout rooms. All right, welcome back, everybody. I see folks coming back. Just a reminder again to vote in the poll and rate the book this month. How many cauldrons would you give it? 1 out of 5 would be didn't like, and 5 out of 5 would be highly recommend. I'm going to end the poll in just a second. Thank you guys for sharing in your breakout rooms. I hope that was fun. So let's go ahead and end the poll. I think everyone has participated. And with 80% of the vote, 4 out of 5 of the participants, Portal of Light is receiving 5 cauldrons. 5 cauldrons for Portal of Light. That is a good one. Very good. Definitely on the highly recommend list. All right, let me move the poll.
Yeah, I would definitely say this is definitely like the type of book that I enjoy. Like it has context. It's not just a reference, but it can be used as a reference, but it has a lot of context. I like it.
Yeah, I agree. I liked that at the end she was like, oh, and by the way, here are some spells. Because that is like how I would do it. I'd be like, oh, and spells, but like all the other stuff first. So I agree. I would love to see one of the major publishers like Llewellyn pick this book up, because I think that they could do just moons and stars and all kinds of amazing things for getting that book out there. And they would really, I think they would benefit, because they would have one of the only Wiccan books for Black people out there. I've Googled that question because people have asked me to see what is out there, and I've been very disappointed. You know, if you Google Wiccan books by Black authors, you'll get a couple of, you know, kind of copy paste type books on Amazon. No offense to those authors, you know, but basically just Wiccan books written by Black people, I think, is what you find. This is the first time I've actually seen somebody actually relate Wicca to the African American experience. So yeah, I agree. I second that. So I would recommend it for sure. There are copies available in the shop if you haven't already gotten a copy, and there are copies in the shop. I might need to restock. But there will shortly be, if there are not currently, copies of next month's book, the June book, which is New World Witchery, a Trove of North American Folk Magic by Corey Hutchison. This is quite a tome, very thick, lots of information in this one. So definitely one of those books that you're, you know, probably not gonna like read cover to cover, because there's a lot of different types of information here, part reference material, you know, part guide material, part history, etc. So it might be the type of book that you kind of skip around in and read the parts that matter to you the most, things like that. So it is a lot, but I think it's going to be really fun to learn all about folk magic. We live here in America, and many of us, well, actually, we're not all in America, are we? Yes, I was going to say North American folk magic is a bit, but North American, yeah, it's just North American folk magic. That's right. So we may have stuff in here that connects to all of us. So I'm excited to get into that stuff. I like folk magic. It's more approachable to me than like the ritual stuff. So I'm excited. And Corey Hutchison is considered one of the foremost knowledgeable experts on the topic of folk magic. So I am excited for that. So if it hasn't been restocked, then there's an order on the way, and you guys will see copies of this in the BronxWitch HeadQuarters shop very shortly, so you can grab your copies. Definitely make sure to remember to use your Coven discount code, which is posted inside of the Coven community discussion board. And there'll be a new one posted for June when we get to June 1st. And yeah, make sure to check out the Coven community space for the links to the June BronxWitch book club session. We will be reading this book on folk magic. And if you want to discuss the book, you want to talk about it, there will be a post in the book club discussion thread so you can share your thoughts on the book before we even get to the meeting. All right. Any questions or final thoughts anyone would like to share? Oh, I see Betty talking, but I didn't see. Let me see if I can help you.
I'm working with an old Mac and an iPad. They took my computer, Allie. They took my computer.
Wow.
I just wanted to say thank you for always having this forum for us because it's very much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I love this. I was looking forward to our meeting all day, especially because I really love the book. So it's great. It's a little bit harder when you don't like the book because you're like, oh, God. But I actually like this one, so that made it even easier. So yeah, thank you guys so much for being here, and I will see you in June. We're gonna get into some folk magic, yo. See you then. Have a great night, guys.